Let's take a look at public policy. So, policy making, as we learned, is not just a straight line, right? It's a cycle because we know that policy goes through several phases from basically deciding, oh, we need a policy to figuring out which policy we want and which policy is going to go forward politically, right? Because it's not just what policy can solve the problem, but also what policy can we actually get passed to actually then passing it, implementing the policy, carrying it out, to then evaluating the policy. And that seems like, okay, well, that's a straight line. At the end, we need a policy, we pick a policy, we make the policy, we implement the policy, we evaluate the policy. Sounds like an end, right? That sounds like a line. But actually, the policy goes back around because once we've evaluated it, we actually have to go back to the beginning because inevitably either we haven't fully solved the problem. Maybe we picked a politically expedient solution, but it wasn't the best solution. So the problem's not fully resolved. So we need to go back around and do more to fix the problem. Or maybe it did fix the problem, but now we have a new problem, a knock-on effect. So, for example, tax policies that try to encourage charitable giving. And so basically tax write-offs that allow you to write off donations to charities ultimately have the effect of potentially lowering the tax burden for the wealthy more than it does for the poor people. So what's happening is we're helping the upper socioeconomic classes and potentially hurting the lower socioeconomic classes. So what's happening is potentially a problem. Depends on your point of view, but if we look at that and we say, hey, this is increased charitable giving, but decreased equality, and that's a problem, then we have to go back around to the beginning and make a policy to try to fix that problem. So policy is not a straight line, it's a cycle. And it's a cycle involving a lot of people because no single person can create policy. Policy is too big for one person. So, for example, the Affordable Care Act was made by a ton of people, right? We had Congress involved. They had to pass the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, as it's often called. They had to pass the law. They had to develop it, and they developed it with a lot of input from President Obama. But they also developed it with a lot of input from pharmaceutical companies, lobbyists, and from patient advocates, lobbyists, and from places like the American Medical Association, right? All these different groups had a say. So we see that Congress, the president, interest groups, let's not forget the bureaucrats who are ultimately going to be implementing the policy, all have a say in policy making. And because policy is really bigger than one single law, right? Policy, for example, healthcare policy, to go with the Affordable Care Act, isn't just the Affordable Care Act, right? It's the whole thrust of the government effort towards healthcare. So the Affordable Care Act was an expression of this policy, but it was not the policy on its own. So policy is so big that we need other actors involved. We can't just have one person making policy, right? Just like it's really hard for one person to even make a law. Imagine making something bigger than a law. We definitely need more than one person involved. Now, foreign policy, because of the president's power as commander-in-chief of the armed forces and as our chief diplomat, the president has a lot of ability to execute foreign policy alone, but still not to make it, right? When he's making foreign policy, he's going to have input from Congress, especially the members of committees like the Committee on Foreign Affairs, right? That's going to be a big player there. And he's also going to have a lot of input from the bureaucracy, right? He has the State Department and the Department of Defense and other groups as well, but those are two big players in foreign policy to help him develop policy and help him execute it. Now, remember, hard power is the power to use the military. So as commander-in-chief, the president can exercise a lot of hard power. But the president, as chief diplomat, can also exercise a lot of soft power, which is considered pretty much anything short of military power, but it often is used to refer to diplomacy. Now, it might also mean public diplomacy, possibly trade agreements, things like that. Now, in the case of the two policies, we looked at healthcare policy and environmental policy. We know there's a lot of collective action problems illustrated. For example, healthcare policy had a lot to do with eliminating free riders, people, the group called the Young Invincibles, who tended to free ride off of public health coverage and not buy insurance because they figured they were healthy. Now, insurers want these people covered because they want people who will pay in premiums and not collect out. So that meant that we had to eliminate these free riders in order to be able to cover, say, people with pre-existing conditions who will always cost insurers money. So that was one of the collective action problems illustrated here. In environmental policy, we know this is a global issue, right? The climate isn't just over the United States, right? The climate is global. So we ultimately need other nations involved. And this can lead to potential prisoner's dilemma, where no nation wants to be the one to make sacrifices in order to clean up their energy usage. But at the same time, we all know that if we all did it, we'd all be better off. It's just if only one person does it, they may still not benefit that much because everyone else is polluting, and they may have downsides to it. So the idea is a prisoner's dilemma. How do we all get people to cooperate when working individually seems like a better bet? Now, another collective action problem illustrated here is the tragedy of the commons, because if everyone just uses the climate and has this unconstrained use of the climate, we know that ultimately it could lead to the climate, a sort of public good, to the climate ruination, hence tragedy of the commons. So we can see there that we've illustrated things like free riding and prisoner's dilemmas and tragedy of the commons. So I hope that's helped clarify some of the key points on policy that may show up on the exam.